Welcome to our special coverage of 2024's economic recap. This year has been shaped by transformative events, from the economic impact of the Israeli war on the Middle East to the return of President-elect Donald Trump, whose economic agenda includes tariffs on China and key allies in the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. Meanwhile, Bitcoin has surged to new heights as it continues to dominate discussions on digital assets. This recap highlights these key developments and their global impact, offering insights into the future trajectory of economies worldwide.
My office charges Netanyahu and Gallant as co-perpetrators and as superiors in the commission of these alleged crimes.
سنقف ضد جميع المخططات التي تستهدف تصفية القضية الفلسطينية.
Israel's finance ministry announced during December that the country's budget deficit for the 12 months to November stood at 7.7% of GDP, down slightly from 7.9% in October. November's deficit was 12.2 billion shekels, down from 16.6 billion a year earlier. December's deficit is expected to rise sharply, potentially pushing the annual figure near 8% of GDP. War-related expenses have reached 112.8 billion shekels. From January to November, government spending rose 24.5% annually to 553.8 billion shekels, while revenues grew 8.9% to 437.2 billion shekels. The Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics has reported a sharp economic collapse in Gaza and a significant downturn in the West Bank due to the ongoing war. According to Bureau President Ola Awad, Gaza's GDP contracted by over 82%, driven by a collapse in economic activities and unemployment soaring to 80%. The West Bank economy also shrank by more than 19%, with unemployment reaching 35%. The data underscores the devastating economic impact of the prolonged conflict on Palestinian territories. The World Bank estimates that the Israeli war has inflicted $5.1 billion in economic losses on Lebanon between October 8, 2023 and October 27, 2024. Physical damage alone accounts for $3.4 billion, with nearly 100,000 homes impacted, mostly in southern regions near the Israeli border. The conflict, intensified by Israel's ground invasion after prolonged cross-border skirmishes initiated by Hezbollah, has hit Lebanon's commerce, tourism, hospitality, and agriculture sectors the hardest. Lebanon's real GDP for 2024 is projected to decline by at least 6.6%, compounding a severe economic crisis that has seen the country lose over 34% of GDP since 2019. Egypt's presidency has announced that the Suez Canal revenues declined by more than 60% in 2024 compared to 2023, amounting to a loss of nearly $7 billion. The figures were discussed during a meeting between President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the head of the Suez Canal Authority, Osama Rabia. The decline is attributed to attacks by the Houthis on ships heading to Israel and vessels from nations involved in a collision striking Yemen and intercepting missiles launched by the Houthis. The International Monetary Fund reported that Red Sea tensions have caused Egypt to lose 70% of Suez Canal revenues, a critical source of foreign currency for the country. The Jordanian Ministry of Tourism estimates a loss of 756,000 tourists by the end of 2024, with tourism revenue expected to decline by 638.5 million dinars. This downturn is attributed to the negative effects of the Gaza war, which began impacting Jordan's tourism sector in November 2023. Between November 2023 and June 2024, Jordan lost approximately 550,000 international tourists, resulting in financial losses of 450 million dinars. Accommodation and food services recorded losses of 33 million dinars and 20 million dinars, respectively.
Israel's aggressive military campaign in 2024 has caused immeasurable human suffering and wreaked havoc on economies across the region. The war, launched with overwhelming force against Gaza and escalating tensions in neighboring countries, has deepened financial crises and destabilized livelihoods. In Gaza, relentless Israeli bombardments have driven unemployment to a staggering 80%, decimating vital sectors such as construction, manufacturing, and trade. The financial stranglehold imposed by Israel has also resulted in severe salary cuts for Palestinian Authority employees, slashing the pay by up to 70%. The authority now faces a funding shortfall exceeding $1 billion. According to World Bank estimates released on December 16th, Gaza's economy contracted by a staggering 86% in the first half of the year, while the West Bank's economy shrank by 23%. Moreover, 88% of private sector facilities in Gaza were destroyed, with 66% completely demolished and 22% partially damaged, marking a near-total collapse of the territory's economic infrastructure. In Lebanon, Israel's aggression against the south has inflicted economic losses exceeding $5.1 billion by mid-November. The real estate sector alone suffered $3.4 billion in damages, with hundreds of homes destroyed. The war displaced 166,000 Lebanese workers, slashed GDP growth by 6.6%, and further deepened the nation's ongoing economic collapse. In Egypt, the war disrupted key economic pillars, particularly the Suez Canal. Revenues fell by 60%, resulting in a $7 billion loss as confirmed by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. In Jordan, Israel's war severely impacted the tourism sector, with revenues declining by 4.4% and tourist arrivals dropping by 6.6%. Retail sectors also suffered as consumers prioritized basic necessities, with pharmacy sales alone plummeting by 20%. In Israel itself, the nation that initiated this conflict, the war exposed significant economic vulnerabilities. The budget deficit surged to 7.7% of GDP, the highest in 2 decades, as escalating military expenses strained the economy. The Israeli Ministry of Finance had initially projected the deficit of 4.9% of GDP for 2024, but soaring war-related costs, coupled with incomplete U.S. military aid commitments of $18 billion, exacerbated the fiscal crisis. Tourism collapsed, with arrivals plunging by 70%, while the absence of 170,000 Palestinian workers paralyzed key industries such as construction.
Joining us from Cairo is economic expert Dr. Mohammed El-Bahwaishi to discuss the economic situation in the region due to the repercussions of the war. Dr. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us on the Economic Bulletin. And let's start with Palestine. The World Bank reported an 86% contraction in Gaza's economy in the first half of 2024. What do you see as the long-term economic consequences for Gaza, and how can it begin to recover from such severe destruction?
To start with, I would like to welcome you and your dear viewers. The escalated and situations in the West Bank and Gaza that affected negatively of the Palestinian economy, that 65% is relying on services and the production sector is only 20%. Due to the military operations and aggression on Gaza, we signed an agreed shrinking of the gas as the industry sector affected of 35%. That totally stopped and 30% back in the West Bank, and the agricultural services and the industry were affected in a full hold in the Gaza Strip due to the economic repercussions increase of unemployment and deterioration of the operation. All these matters that led to the deterioration of the Palestinian economy of more than 65% and its incapability to operate itself, and all this are closely linked of the Israeli operations made by the Israeli entity, whether in the Gaza Strip or Gaza, that exceeded day by day, and in the West Bank aren't
Yes, sir. Sorry for interrupting you. We're going to move to the West Bank later. But now I would like to ask you, with unemployment reaching 80% in Gaza and significant destruction to key sectors like construction and trade, what economic strategies could be implemented to provide relief and rebuild the job market?
In principle, the military operation should come to an end in order to reoperate due to the aggression. And without this, the unemployment rate will increase in region, the dialogue, and move forward of the reconstruction of Gaza is at the beginning of a positive economic indicators.
Now, moving to the West Bank has seen a 23% economic contraction. How does the situation in Gaza and the West Bank differ economically, and what impact will this have on Palestinian economic unity and growth in the future?
They are very much close to each other, West Bank and Gaza, but Gaza is totally negatively impacted for the linkage of the West Bank that is linked directly to Israel, and the idea of resorted to the workers for the West Bank that led to the decrease of the workers, and the process of the Palestinian economy and construction were deteriorated to about 38%, and the agricultural was affected of 17%, and the industrial sector was affected by 30% in the Gaza Strip in itself. Its negative impact aren't isolated with each other, either in Gaza Strip or in the West Bank.
Now, sir, moving to Lebanon, which has suffered over $5.1 billion in economic losses, particularly in real estate and infrastructure. How can Lebanon address these losses amidst its ongoing financial crisis, and what role can international aid play?
Certainly, Lebanon has negatively affected entering the military equation and the continued aggression by the Israeli army. And we've witnessed that such aggression affected Lebanon grossly, and the economic Lebanon hasn't reached the state of recovery, as suffering from crises of historical roots for a long time, and in the face of construction, the military operation entered that caused the deterioration to the blank. Lebanon, without the international assistance, as we say that Lebanon is totally different from Gaza Strip and Gaza. Some part of the international parties wish to provide assistance for Lebanon alongside with the Arab support. All this might help to overcome the negative impact of the crisis during the past months in order for Lebanon to reconstruct its economy once again.
Now let's analyze Israel's economy. Israel's budget deficit has surged to the highest level in 20 years, reaching 7.7% of GDP. How sustainable is this level of deficit in the long run, and what steps should Israel take to stabilize its economy?
The Israeli economy, we may say, is diversified, that largely relying on the productive sector and tourism, but negatively affected, that lost much of its revenues that reached the numbers we've highlighted. But let's say that Israel is always relying on the Western North, the American support, and the idea of the normalizations imposed by the USA and the international community who are going to deal with Israel is the crossing gate of any productions. But the crisis led to a very gross economic loss that never seen in the history of Israel, either in the modern or the old history. Considering that Israel has crossed several of aggressions against the neighboring countries, with the expansion of the conflict with the neighboring countries that exceeded Gaza, reaching Lebanon and Syria and Iran and Yemen. All these matters and the expansion of its scale would ignite the tension and increasing the negative impact for the non-recovery case or phase, but from America and Europe countries won't be able for the Israeli economy to continue or in reaching the recovery in a speedy matter. But
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed El-Bahwashi, for your insights and for all the information you provided us with. And now we move to the economic expectations for 2025. The International Monetary Fund released its October 2024 World Economic Outlook, forecasting global GDP growth of 3.2% in both 2024 and 2025, maintaining a modestly positive outlook despite ongoing risks. The report highlights easing inflationary pressures, expectations for rate cuts, and geopolitical challenges that continue to threaten stability. Notable adjustments from the July 2024 forecast include an improved U.S. growth outlook, with 2024 GDP raised to 2.8% and 2025 GDP raised to 2.2%. As inflation falls, the IMF anticipates lower real policy rates through 2026, which should support global economic growth in the coming years. The World Bank forecasts global growth at 2.6% in 2024, improving slightly to 2.7% in 2025 to 26, well below the pre-pandemic average of 3.1%. Growth in developing economies is expected to be 4% in 2024 to 25, with low-income countries seeing a boost to 5%. However, challenges like debt, inflation, and climate impacts continue to affect recovery. Global inflation is expected to moderate to 3.5% in 2024, and interest rates will remain high at 4% through 2025 to 26, putting pressure on the global economy. The income gap between developing and advanced economies is expected to widen.
The global economy is projected to experience cautious growth in 2025, according to the latest forecasts from the International Monetary Fund's (IMF) and the World Bank. The IMF predicts a global growth rate of 3.2%, consistent with its 2024 projection, but still below pre-pandemic averages. The World Bank offers a more conservative estimates, forecasting growth at 2.7%. This outlook reflects persistent challenges, including geopolitical tensions, tighter monetary policies, and lingering supply chain disruptions. Advanced economies are expected to grow modestly at 1.8%, while emerging and developing economies may achieve a stronger 4.2% expansion. Inflation is anticipated to ease further, with global rates declining to 4.3% in 2025 from 5.8% in 2024. Central banks, including the US Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, are likely to continue reducing interest rates to bolster economic stability. Goldman Sachs Research projects global GDP growth of 2.7% in 2025, with the US outperforming its peers. US GDP is forecast to rise by 2.5%, significantly outpacing the Eurozone's modest 0.8% growth. Robust labor productivity and supportive fiscal policies are credited with underpinning the US resilience, while Europe faces persistent economic headwinds. A proposed 10% US tariff on imports could reduce global GDP by 0.4%, with sharper impacts on China and Eurozone. However, easing inflation and accommodative monetary policies are expected to support global economic stability. In the Eurozone, growth prospects remain subdued, with forecasts downgraded to 1.2% for 2025. Spain is projected to lead the region, buoyed by strong industrial growth and consumer spending. In contrast, Germany and Italy face structural challenges, with growth stagnating at 0.4% and 0.7% respectively. China's economy is forecast to grow by 4.5% in 2025, while uncertainties surrounding trade policies may weigh on exports. Policymakers are expected to deploy stimulus measures to sustain growth. Despite these challenges, opportunities arise from declining inflation, rebalanced labor markets, and monetary policy normalization. Analysts, however, caution that geopolitical tensions and shifting trade policies could temper the pace of recovery. As the global economy navigates a complex landscape, 2025 is shaping up to be a year of cautious optimism. with growth depending on how effectively nations address these evolving challenges.
And now we move to the United States and the impact of the return of President-elect Donald Trump.
Because the fact make America great again.
Have Joe Biden.
Taken back.
President-elect Donald Trump has announced plans to impose up to 60% tariffs on all goods imported from China to the United States. The move comes as Trump seeks to address economic challenges, including China's slowing growth, youth unemployment, and a crashed property market. China has been focusing heavily on military expansion, leading to neglected domestic economic growth, particularly in consumer industries. This potential tariff threat could force Beijing to shift its priorities to stabilize its economy. President-elect Donald Trump has announced plans to impose a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico through an executive order on his first day in office. The proposed tariff could significantly disrupt trade routes, particularly for agricultural producers who rely on exports to these key trading partners. Trump also reaffirmed his intention to levy an additional 10% duty on goods from China as part of his broader strategy to encourage companies to relocate production to the United States. The announcement, shared on Truth Social, aligns with Trump campaign's commitment to aggressive tariffs aimed at bolstering domestic manufacturing. President-elect Donald Trump has called on the European Union to increase its imports of U.S. oil and gas or face tariffs on key exports, including cars and machinery. Despite the European Union already being a major buyer, Trump insists the U.S. will increase production to meet demand. He said that otherwise, it's tariffs all the way. In response, the European Commission expressed its willingness to discuss strengthening the already robust energy partnership between the European Union and the United States.
President-elect Donald Trump is shaking up global trade with a bold and controversial tariff plan targeting key trade partners. What does this mean for the U.S. economy and international relations? Let's start with China, where Trump pledged to impose a 60% tariff rate on Chinese products and has recently raised the odds by promising an additional 10% tariff. While these tariffs aim to curb Beijing's influence, they would also drive up costs for American businesses and consumers. And closer to home, Trump plans to impose a significant 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico on his first day in office. He has linked these tariffs to ongoing concerns about illegal migration and drug trafficking. Economists warn that such measures could severely disrupt North American supply chains. European allies were not spared as Trump vows a 10% tariff on global imports to the US and threatens that the EU will pay a big price for insufficient American exports. Post-victory, he has demanded increased European purchases of US oil and gas, threatening further penalties and escalating energy sector tensions. Panama's growing trade ties with China have drawn criticism from Trump, who accuses the canal of overcharging the US ships. Experts warn that this trade policy could target Panama, risking disruptions to vital shipping routes, with potential tariffs or restrictions to curb Chinese investments. A cornerstone of Trump's tariffs is incentivizing companies to manufacture within the US key industries like steel, electronics, and automotive, which have seen a partial revival. However, critics argue that the cost to consumers and the economy outweighs the benefits. Despite this, companies like Intel and Ford have announced new investments in the US-based facilities. The big question now is, what will Donald Trump's trade agenda look like if he applies all his threats and warnings? From Europe to Panama and from China to Canada, the stakes are high for global trade. And for now, the world is watching.
Joining us from Washington is American author and chairman of Links Investment Advisory, Mr. Peter Tanyas, to discuss the U.S. trade relations amid the threats and promises of President-elect Donald Trump, who will be back in office in January. Mr. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on Q News. And first off, what is the potential impact of Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on the U.S. economy and its relations with key trade partners?
If we take him at his word, and you just summarized all of the different tariffs that he's threatening to impose, it would basically be a trade disaster. Give you a couple of examples. Canada and Mexico are the largest trading partners of the United States. Now imagine if there was a 25% tariff on all the trade and the imports we get from Mexico and Canada. It would have a disastrous effect throughout the economy. And then there's China. A 60% tariff on China would also be disastrous because we import $500 billion worth of goods from China every year. So it is likely that most of this won't happen and that it will simply be a device in a trade negotiation. But people are still worried.
Adding to the 60% tariffs to be imposed on China, Trump has also threatened additional tariffs on Chinese imports. How do you see this escalating trade tensions, and what could be the economic fallout for both nations?
Yeah, so the other concern is that China will try to bypass any tariffs the U.S. imposes on China by simply moving some manufacturing or sending their exports to other countries like Mexico or other countries in Central and South America and have them come in through those countries to the United States. But Trump is already preempting that by saying that if they try to do that, he'll impose similar tariffs on any of those goods that come that way. But here's the real concern. The concern is that none of this makes any economic sense at all to anybody. The problem is that most leaders view Trump as a little bit crazy. And because of that, they're worried that he may do something irrational, which most of these tariffs are, and that is what has had people concerned. But I assure you that if any of these things came to pass, there would be a great deal of uproar here in Washington, D.C., and the lobbyists would be out full force to make sure that it doesn't stay in place.
Now, closer to home, Trump has proposed a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico. How could these measures disrupt North American supply chains, and what are the implications for industries that rely on cross-border trade?
I mean, the results would be extraordinarily harmful. We import a lot of automobiles from Mexico. We import a great deal of agricultural products from these countries. Prices would go up. It would be inflationary in the United States. So this is almost a laughable proposal. The problem is that what is likely to happen is that this will prompt immediate negotiations, and Trump is hoping for some wins, small wins in the negotiations with our trading partners that he can claim to be victories. But as they stand now, the numbers that are being proposed in terms of the tariffs don't make sense and, of course, cannot stand.
Now, integrating the European Union into our conversation, Trump has also targeted European allies with a 10% tariff on global imports. What are the potential consequences for U.S. and European Union trade relations, and how could European businesses respond?
Yeah, the way that is also not a very that is also not a very likely event. The way the Europeans would respond is by imposing reciprocal tariffs on American goods going over to Europe. So you can imagine that American manufacturers who trade with Europe were not going to be very happy about that. And of course, it could hurt them very competitively. So here again, these are things that are not likely to come to pass as we've been discussing them. Now, don't
Thank you,
get me
Mr. Peter Tanya. Sorry for interrupting you due to the shortage of time. Thank you so much for your insights and for all the information you provided us with. Thank you so much for being with us. As we step into 2025, the global economy stands at a pivotal moment, facing both challenges and opportunities that will define its trajectory in the years to come. Stay tuned as we continue to track and analyze these unfolding dynamics. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.